He was the man everyone looked up to, the brilliant CEO, the business genius, the name behind a fortune built on discipline and ambition. But that day, something broke. It was in the middle of traffic, in the silence between one notification and another, that he heard a phrase, and his soul was never the same again. Vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity. This is the story of a man who had everything and lost all meaning. But it is also the story of how, in the depths of emptiness, he found that which neither money, nor success, nor fame could ever buy. This is Thomas's story, and maybe it's a little bit of yours too. Thomas had always been the kind of man who seemed to have cracked the code of life. At 37, he was the CEO of one of the country's most promising startups, the owner of a penthouse with a panoramic view of Manhattan, and a frequent feature on business magazine covers. His social media feed was a catalog of achievements: dinners in Dubai, conferences in London, weekends on yachts with top-tier executives. To the outside world, everything seemed glorious. But inside, there was a silence no one could hear. A silence he himself pretended not to listen to. Every morning, his alarm went off at 5:30. He got up mechanically, played the same ambient music, wore the same minimalist clothing, and drank the same energy shake. His routine was flawless: meditation, workouts, reading, market analysis. His day began with surgical precision. Yet, when he looked in the mirror, something seemed strange in his reflection. It wasn't tiredness, not stress. It was disconnection. A kind of absence that motivation couldn't cure. Something was wrong, but he couldn't name it. One morning, while adjusting his tie for a live interview, his hand trembled slightly. He ignored it, but it would happen again, and it would intensify. That week, he felt the first sting of anxiety when he entered the elevator. Crowded, stuffy. The air felt as if it was vanishing. His chest grew heavy. His eyes searched for an escape, but all he found was a question whispering within. If I have everything, why do I feel so empty? And so, quietly, without warning or tragedy, the crack began. Small, almost imperceptible, but enough to set in motion the collapse of an invisible empire, the one he had built within himself. In the days that followed, that crack grew uncontrollably. The crises came quietly, yet precisely. Tachycardia before presentations, sweating during simple meetings, memory lapses during interviews. Thomas, who had once been known for his eloquence and mastery, now stumbled over his own words and froze in front of questions he used to answer with ease. The pressure that used to energize him now crushed him. But out of pride, he wore the same trained smile, pretended to be in control, and shoved the pain under the rug of productivity. At home, things weren't any better. The silence of the vast rooms echoed louder than any leadership speech. The walls adorned with modern art seemed to mock his inner state. He tried to fill the emptiness with more of the same, buying expensive watches, booking last-minute trips, piling up appointments. But nothing worked. With each new acquisition, he felt further and further away from himself. It was as if he were trying to fix an abyss with gold coins. One night, after a corporate event, Thomas got into the car and collapsed into the back seat. He asked the driver to take him around the city with no destination. He watched the buildings pass by the window, as if he were on the outside of his own life. I've wanted everything and lost something along the way, he thought. But he didn't know exactly what. His eyes fixed on the dark reflection in the glass, where he saw something that terrified him, a lost look. It wasn't depression, it was disorientation. The world cheered his journey, but he felt himself drifting away from a starting point he no longer remembered. It was like climbing a staircase that seemed to lead nowhere. And the worst part, even realizing this, he kept climbing. On that gray Thursday, the clock read 7:48 a.m. when Thomas got into the car, with deep eyes and a heavy chest. His phone vibrated nonstop with notifications, reminders, meetings. But he didn't respond. He asked the driver to take an alternate route, as if he wanted to delay the inevitable. The sky was overcast, and the traffic was a mess. On the radio, the usual voices talked about the market, inflation, foreign politics. He turned it off. Silence filled the space for a moment, until, accidentally, the station changed, and a different voice took over the air. It was an old recording. The audio quality was rough, but there was something in the tone of the preacher's voice that cut through the city noise. "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher. "All is vanity." Thomas raised an eyebrow. It sounded like a challenge. The man on the radio continued, "What does man gain from all his labor and the toil of his heart under the sun?" Silence. Thomas felt a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just the voice. It was the message. Each sentence seemed directed at him with surgical precision. He didn't know the name of that book. He'd never been interested in religion. But there was truth there, raw, uncomfortable, and honest. For a moment, he forgot about the traffic, the meetings, the prophets. He felt a lump in his throat. The car was stopped. The city was in motion. And there he was, caught between two worlds. The external, which he controlled, and the internal, which now demanded to be heard. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The preacher's voice echoed in his mind like a repetitive, sticky song. But this time, it wasn't annoying. It was disturbing. With every sentence he remembered, a piece of his life seemed to crumble from the inside. "Vanity of vanities," he repeated silently while staring at the dark ceiling of the room. Lying on a king-size bed that had never seemed so empty. For the first time in years, he didn't want to win. He just wanted to understand why everything he had achieved seemed to have turned to dust. In the following weeks, Thomas fell into a kind of inner silence. He kept going to work, attending meetings, responding to emails. But there was a visible disconnect. He avoided eye contact. He spoke little. And secretly, he began to search for the passage he had heard on the radio. He discovered it was from the book of Eclesiastes. He read it all in one sleepless night. He read it as if searching for a mirror, and he found it. Each verse stripped him of his justifications. Everything was vanity. Everything was chasing after the wind. And now, the wind was blowing against him. When he looked at himself again in the bathroom mirror at the office, he didn't see the brilliant CEO, but a man stripped of purpose. With money, but no direction. With fame, but no rest. And he asked himself, at what point did I trade essence for performance? No one demanded this from him. No one pressured him. The world only wanted results. But something inside him demanded meaning. And that something was more persistent than any partner, shareholder, or mentor. The mirror now didn't just show a face. It showed an abyss. And he knew that if he didn't change course, he would keep falling. The days passed, and with them, the last veil fell. Thomas realized he didn't need another therapist, another motivational speech, or another luxury trip to escape. He needed silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of confrontation. So, on a gray Saturday, he took his car and drove aimlessly for hours. He didn't tell anyone. He turned off his phone. He stopped in an unfamiliar neighborhood where time seemed to have no urgency. He walked down narrow streets until a small church with open doors caught his attention. It was modest. No shine, no stage, just wooden benches, dusty stained glass, and a simple altar. And yet, that place attracted him like a magnet. He entered slowly, sat at the back. There was no one. For the first time in a long time, he was neither seen nor admired. And there, in anonymity, he took a deep breath and whispered words he didn't even know he had kept inside. God, if you exist, find me here. The words came out trembling, but filled with truth. He didn't ask for success. He didn't ask for answers. He only asked for presence. He cried in silence. Not a dramatic cry, but a release of the soul, like washing away years of self-sufficiency. The emptiness was still there, but now there was a crack in the darkness, a fissure through which light began to enter. On that cold bench, Thomas had no visions, nor did he hear voices, but something changed. For the first time, he felt that he didn't have to carry the world on his shoulders, that maybe, just maybe, his soul was being heard. And that was more precious than any number in his bank account. It was the beginning of a new construction, silent, invisible, but real. The return to routine was silent, but filled with small revolutions. Thomas didn't announce any changes. He didn't post emotional texts on social media. He didn't give interviews about a new phase. But something had changed within him, and those who knew him could feel it. He began arriving at the office earlier, not to produce more, but to walk through the corridors in silence, observe the employees, and listen without haste. He stopped treating numbers as gods. He began seeing faces, stories, lives. That company, which had once been an extension of his ego, was now becoming a tool, a channel, a field of impact. Over time, he created an internal psychological support program for entrepreneurs and leaders within the company. He reduced inhuman goals. He implemented spaces for pause and reflection. And, outside of work, he began visiting his parents on Sundays. He cooked with his mother, listened to his father's stories. Simple things he had once despised, now they were sources of joy that no international trip could offer. He also started discreetly funding social projects in underprivileged neighborhoods. He never spoke about it. It was between him and God. The most curious thing was that his company grew even more, but he no longer measured success with the same standards. His identity was no longer in what he did, but in who he was becoming. He slept better. He breathed deeply more often. And at night, he read passages from Eclesiastes before going to sleep, as if reminding himself daily, everything passes. Everything is vanity, except what is eternal. Thomas didn't become a monk. He was still a leader. But now, he was a leader who understood the value of silence, the power of presence, and the depth of purpose. Months later, Thomas walked alone through a park during sunset. The world continued to move fast. The markets remained unstable, and his schedule was still full. But something in him had slowed down. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. He sat on a wooden bench, watched children playing, couples walking by, and elderly people chatting. Life, in its simplest form, finally seemed to make sense. He remembered the first time he heard that voice on the radio. It was just traffic, just any other morning. But in that city noise, God had whispered. Now, he understood that the emptiness he felt wasn't the absence of accomplishments. It was the absence of eternity. He had lived for the temporary, and the temporary would never be enough. True peace didn't come when he accumulated, but when he surrendered. And that surrender made him lighter, more whole, more human. Thomas smiled. Not a commercial smile, nor a smile for a photo. It was the smile of someone who had finally found what they didn't even know they were searching for. Rest for the soul. The pursuit of performance had given way to presence. Blind ambition had turned into purpose. And even without all the answers, he was at peace with the questions. He stood up, took a deep breath, and continued on his way. Not as a man who had conquered the world, but as someone who had finally learned how to live.
Jesus said, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" If you felt impacted by this video, or if you know someone who would benefit from it, please share it and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for being here.